Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And I'm super excited finally to bring you Mythic League Tournament number 2. We're going to be watching from Knight's perspective. And for those of you who will be watching the other videos, we'll see some common characters in these final videos. That being Tino, who was the Mythic League number 1 champion, who beat Knight in this Mythic League 2. Again, it is Knight versus Tino. And it was definitely a smaller tournament, but still just like so many props to the fact that these players just play at such a high level and continue to see each other in the finals, and really get to test their matchups and their skill in Magic Spellslingers. And so we're going to be watching, like I said, from Knight's perspective. I'm really excited to get this video out because we got a lot of other tournament footage to put out for Mythic League number 3. So thank you for sticking with it. I know it's been a while, so shout out to Knight and Tino again for you guys for helping set up the footage and everything, and just for being such great sports and great players playing out in this tournament. So I might pause here and there, do a little bit of reflection on some of the games. I always love to live cast if I can. That's something I'm going to try and do a little bit more of in the future when I'm able to. So here we get the luxury of starting and stopping the footage here from Knight's perspective. But again, thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for sticking with the channel. It is, just to give a reference point, it is June 5th today, a bit late on the technically end of April Mythic League tournament. So apologies for that one, but we're here. And that means at the end of June, so in a few weeks, make sure you hit your Mythic. Make sure you post that in our Mythic League channel for the LGS Discord, which will have the link in the bottom. And again, as always, I really appreciate you liking, commenting, and subscribing. Love to hear from you guys, and really good to be back kind of in the saddle with Magic Spellslingers. So without further ado, let's see what Knight's got cooking in this matchup of Serra versus Nissa. Which is really such a treat because both players could not play the same Spellslingers. That was a rule that we just made in the Mythic League tournaments for the LGS because we thought it would add a bit more variety, especially when the metas have been, pretty similar in a way. So Tino won with Garrick versus Nissa in the first Mythic League tournament, and in this one it's swapped, and now Tino is playing Nissa and Knight is playing Serra as a way to answer a lot of the Garricks, and I think that had worked out well, and some of the mid-range decks. So yeah, here Knight is just looking for a little bit more power, I think, in that mulligan. And I remember I have seen this footage before because obviously I was there during the live tournament. Definitely a pretty rough hand to start with. It's not that, Nissa is going to put out so much pressure, but when you have such an awkward kind of draw like this, it's just going to kind of bottleneck your turns, right? You're not curving out going 2, 3, 4. And so it really is going to depend on what Knight draws. And in my opinion on this matchup, I'll talk about this in other videos, I think Nissa has a bit of an advantage, being able to be proactive, and really find ways of applying pressure, but also being able to go over the top. So Knight's going to probably just try and do whatever it can to just set up a decent ability to establish board presence in the early game, and then really find ways through Second Sun and Sun Titan of just keeping the life total as high as possible and being able to pressure Tino back. And Tino's got a decent start here, just running out the Jiraga Druid. Knight also being able to get an early Angel off the Disciple isn't too bad. And drawing Strahd here, not the worst, not the best. Certainly not something you're going to be able to do for quite a while. But it does make, as Knight's highlighting here, your next Angel cost a little bit less. And maybe there's some advantage to be had. But this is just a great 3-4 for Nissa, being able to draw 2 cards, gain 2 life, even get to smack here, right? There's just already a lot that Tino's getting to do, and it's probably going to start to get harder and harder as Knight gets into the matchup to keep up in terms of card advantage if you don't have a way to answer the Jiraga Druid. But I will say, Serra's always gaining a life every turn. There's a lot of life gain in most builds. So it's not like taking 3 damage here does that much for Tino. And you'd rather just save your blockers for much more relevant creatures that are more high power, right? So the Gatstaff Agitator here is a pretty good target for that. I gotta say, I've definitely been impressed with the Shrine. You know, when the format took more of a turn away from aggressive and more into mid-range to sort of cope with Garrick, I think that things like the Shrine got a little bit more value. And just the fact that you can set up into sweepers and still get your 4/4 flyer right after the sweeper is a pretty nice interaction for the deck. Yeah. So Tina's really just able to draw so many cards here and just probably continue to apply pressure. We're at magic number 8, right? Now we have to be thinking about Crater Hoof potentially, right? And you're going to have to start thinking about worms in the future. But, you know, Knight's pretty healthy here. He's got plenty to do after this turn. Maybe you're just slamming Sun Titan. Maybe you want to get Second Suns in your deck as soon as possible to give yourself the highest chance of getting the Second Sun draw later on as like a way to pressure Tino and a way to sweep the board. Because if you count the Second Suns done in your deck, you really have 4 sweepers. You got 2 Day of Judgment, 2 Second Suns. So there's just a lot of ways for Knight to reset the game. But again, this is all contingent upon having enough on the ground to keep Knight alive to get to those later stages of the game. So here you could do a combination of Desperate Prayer and Immolating Glare if you want to hold on to your gem. But I think this play really is giving Knight a bit more power. And unfortunately, we don't have access to the deck list because of the way that we have things formatted. So here, you know, Knight is going to know that Tino doesn't have Lava Wave in his build. He's running Day of Judgment to deal with Death Shadow. So Knight can pretty much play into what would be pretty tough if Tino had Lava Wave confidently, because Knight knows that he doesn't. So here, you know, Tino's still got some decent attacks. It's got, you know, you get 1 non-favorable off the 7/7. You could trade with a Jiraga Druid, and then you've got 2 pretty bad blocks. But here, I think Knight does probably the smartest thing, was just to make sure block 1 Jiraga Druid, probably blocking the second. I honestly don't remember, actually. And then maybe just soaking up some damage. I think these blocks make a lot of sense. You know, and you're going to block here, you know, give yourself a bit of time to re-up your board the following turn. Honestly, if I'm playing this matchup from this perspective, I'm feeling pretty decent as Knight. Yes, you're taking 12 there because you don't really have any favorables, but you've just got a pretty good setup this next turn. But I will say, pretty rough to not have your 6 land drop go off there. Fine attack, you're going to get your card, you're going to trade for at least a 5/3. No blocks. Pretty interesting. So now you're thinking about, okay, why does Tino not care about my Sun Titan? And trying to figure out how things are going to play. Yep. Now, playing out some removal is just a good way to start trying to re-stabilize on the board. And I think here, it's pretty reasonable to go for either. If you play Watchwall, if you're getting to trade for a card for ideally the 5/3. Here it's interesting, Knight goes for the Desperate Prayer. I'm not sure that that's correct. I think I probably would have preferred to see a Serra's Disciple or a Watchwolf there, just because it is a body on the board. And Yeah, gaining some life, drawing a card is fine, but I think it's just so important that you stay like at parity as much as possible when you're playing matchups against mid-range as Serra, because if you're not careful, you can just take a ton of damage. Um, and then you're not going to have enough time to stabilize. So I think Watchwolf was probably the better play. I personally would be thinking about, okay, probably going to trade Sun Titan off here to save some life. Probably going to want to trade my Watchwolf to do the same. And then, yeah, you untap, you've traded for 2 creatures, you've got your Angel. And then, in turn 7, you've got options. You can go 2/2/3 with the Immolating Glare. So here, you have sort of awkward blocks. This is fine, right? You can trade your Angel for 2 damage so that your Serra's Disciple can trade with it the following turn. That's not the worst. But like this attack, I would much rather have a Watchwolf that's trading for the 5/3. And I think it's reasonable for Knight to take 5 here, which is effectively 4 because he's gaining life the next turn. But part of me would have been like, you know what? I got my card off of Sun Titan. I just want to trade, keep my life total high. Next turn, I'm going to play, 2/2 drops and an Immolating Glare. And I think that would have been a pretty strong kind of chain. But I think it's all very like close decision making. This is pretty brutal. Obviously, like Knight wanted to save this to be able to attack, and having the Predator to kill it is not ideal. Predator getting buffed by Critter Hoof is just really rough. So here, as Knight's pointing out, you can pinpoint to kill the 5/1 for free, which is not bad. And then you can just go double 2-drop and just try and set up your next turn. And obviously, Day of Judgment in the future would be pretty decent. I think it's fine just to probably go play Serra Disciple, see what you hit, and then play Watchwolf or Healer. I'd probably just go for the Healer. Just take the life up front. The 2/3 body is still fine. It's not really helping you to play the Watchwolf. Okay. Let me hit Angel of Mercy, which will be cheaper in game 3. Here, I think it's fine just to play the Healer. You don't get like a ton out of playing the Angel because you're going to have to... Yeah, I think you'd prefer to hold your better creatures and use your kind of dopier creatures first to get damage. So now I'm thinking, okay, basically Tino's going to attack every turn and reapply pressure to the board. How am I going to deal with that? So here we see the Primal Summoning. Misses out on a Hermit of the Flock. But now we'll see what Tino drops to continue the pressure and have a full grip. Second Crater Hoof. Yeah, so just really a ton of pressure here. Crater Hoofs really still just do quite a lot of work in Nissa. So not too much you can interact with when it comes to Serra for that. So really at this point, these turns are just all about efficiency. So you can go Power Word, Stun, Angel of Mercy, Watchwolf for a full 8 mana. And I think that's pretty easy here because you get to gain some life. You get to get a decent block on at least one of the creatures. And you just want to keep your life total as high as possible. Try and hit your sweeper. It's pretty good for Knight in this game at this point, in the sense that you've seen both Crater Hoofs. So you know there's no like real haste threat that's going to be coming down. So I think here it's really just all about, all right, let me just keep myself alive, get to my sweepers, make sure I'm okay. But this is a really great play from Tino, right? Being able to heal all your creatures so there's no favorable trades at all. Just getting to attack for 14 here. This puts Knight in a pretty difficult position. Also, Tristani got both Crater Hoofs, so just getting a 9/9 Tristani. Okay, so Pinpoint, hits the 2 creatures. That's not terrible. And then you can play Sun Titan. Just try and dig for more ways to stabilize on the board. And it's funny, you'll see Tino with like 4 mana still up, and really what he's doing is saying, I know this game is going to go long. I'm not going to commit into a sweeper. I'm going to just apply pressure as consistently as possible so that there's really no way for Knight to get the most value out of sweepers. And when you're good at Magic, the Gathering, and I would say Spellslingers, that's something you should always be doing with your opponent, is if you know that, if you A, know your opponent has a sweeper, or B, know that it's pretty likely, you should find a way to play around it. It doesn't mean you stop applying pressure. Most of the time it means you're just applying pressure in a way where you make them have it, right? And then you refill your board and try and go for lethal. Immolating Glare hits here, taking 14. And, just to go back to Knight's decision there to play the Immolating Glare and the Second Sun's Dawn, Knight's saying, you know what, I got to give myself better chances of hitting a sweeper here. And so let me just get the Second Sun's Dawn. I'm not dead on board. Let me just give myself another chance. So I've got 3 sweepers in my deck. And I think that was probably the right call. As much as Sun Titan thins your deck and provides you a blocker, you don't really want to block with it anyway. You want to get the value. So you'd be sacrificing life anyway. And then at that point, if you're sacrificing life, why not just Second Sun's Dawn so you can make sure that you get your Second Sun? So definitely looking pretty rough for Knight at this point. Tino's got obviously plenty of ways to pressure. And Knight's Land is going to go off here to miss on the Second Sun. And I remember when we were watching this, and I was like, man, if he hits Second Sun, it's probably tough for Tino to really apply. You've gone through multiple Crater Hoofs. I mean, I believe Tino in his list has Crush for Worms too. But just ripping this Second Sun and having your land proc so you can't play it. Logan, if you're watching this, I hear your words in my head of, I hate this land. It always goes off at the wrong time. And that is a bit of technically a risk in mid-range and control decks when you are running a land that's not just a basic land or refreshment stand, right? Where it's still going to give you that guaranteed mana gem every turn. You run this risk. So at this point, it's pretty tough. Obviously, Knight would have been happy to slam that Second Sun as soon as he got it. But I remember watching from his perspective and being like, yeah, that's probably about it, unfortunately. A 30% chance. Oh, Knight, I felt for him so much in this moment. It's like you can't control for stuff like this, obviously. And you kind of just have to roll with it and be like, well, I played to the best of my out. So, and if Tino doesn't have removal here, right, or doesn't have overrun, Knight's actually still alive. So the overrun in the main deck really makes a difference in this matchup, as you can see, because there's nothing Knight could have done about this. That's going to be the end of that game, and I think we get to see Knight sideboarding here, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So we also get to see a bit of Knight's build, which is nice. So cutting the Sanguine Bond. The Avengers don't do a whole lot, although they can set up Icing Death they can set up Icing Death. It's kind of nice, but yeah, I think the Helixes are nice. Thalia also does some work, definitely in the matchup. And Archangel. Yeah, and Geist of St. Traft, it's interesting to see that because I forgot that was in Knight's build. That's a card that I was really hyped on as playing as Serra, but I think over time I've been like, you know what? I actually think really if we're making sure that we have any specific like legendaries in there, Tristani is an excellent one, and I would say Lavinia. Lavinia obviously is specifically pretty solid against Craterhoof decks and Garruk decks, because most things are going to have 5 power or more. But I remember playing, this was basically a very similar build to what Odyssey had piloted in the first Mythic League tournament to counter Garruk, and I really liked the card. I really liked the overall build. But yeah, I think people have tried Serra a lot since it became a little bit more meta, and since it became a bit more of a like just identifiable bad match for Garruk. I'm definitely going to be putting a video on matchups pretty soon. I'm pretty excited to do kind of a deep dive on what I think about matchups and why I think sideboards are very interesting for tournaments and really allow you to explore how to make your matchups better. And therefore, in best of one, you can even tweak your deck to have a better win percentage if you're seeing other things. But there we got to see a little bit of Knight's process with cutting some of the pinpoint Avengers and cutting the Sanguine Bond, which can be a really nice way of kind of like faking out your opponent and applying some pressure with the Second Sun's Dawn, or even Eminent Archangel. But I like what, Knight was sideboarding there. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Tino sides in the one-turn kill into his deck. He's just running a standard version of Nissa that's like pretty mid-range focused, and then he sort of transformational sideboards into one-turn kill, which is obviously pretty threatening to Serra. Although it can be hard to pull off, it is just another really incredible way of closing out the game when Serra obviously creates this crazy life total differential in a lot of the slower matchups. So round 1 goes to Tino, and we're going to get into round 2. All right, and now we're going to get into round 2. So I think here it's hard to tell. I think this matchup gets closer when Tino gets access to the one-turn kill as a way of really answering Nissa's ability to go long. But I do think that Knight gets access to some nice ways of staying alive in the mid-game. And Lavinia, definitely a card you like to see early, but unfortunately, there's some awkward cards here, and I think Knight's going to want to look for some removal, and maybe some other early game pressure. I don't know that I would have full mulliganed that. I might have kept maybe even Desperate Prayer. But I think here Knight's just feeling like, you know what, I think we need to get specific kind of mid to late game threats. Icing Death, as he's hovering over, is a really, really powerful card. And sometimes it looks like you're setting up a Day of Judgment, and sometimes you're actually setting up an Icing Death. Because it kind of looks the same. You're making certain blocks that you normally might not make, or certain attacks. So sometimes you get to get your opponent because they're like, oh, I'm just going to save some life. Whereas Icing Death would have made it so it wasn't as powerful, but it ends up being that way because you read it as a Day of Judgment. That's something I've experienced in these matchups as well. So not bad. I mean, you don't love to hit your 3-drop Ragnar Redeemer in a mid-range matchup. It's not really going to do much for you. But, Knight's kind of humming along here. Going to have Desperate Prayer, have an additional draw, and maybe see if he can kind of curve out and just have some decent board presence. Tino having the turn 2 Rampant Growth, it's the best thing that Nissa can do on turn 2. So I don't know. I always am like, ugh, I hate to see it, because it's just having that additional mana for the entire rest of the game is something that Nissa can obviously extremely take advantage of. Yeah, so you're trading 3 for 3 here. I think it's pretty reasonable to hold on to Regna. But I think I'd probably be looking to trade it off sooner rather than later, just because it's going to get killed by the Daybreak Ranger or dealt with by the Daybreak Ranger pretty easily. Yep, just going for nice little turn 4. Oh, and then I remember, right, this gets locked somehow. I forget how Knight undoes it. But I remember we were watching this. We're like, uh-oh, do we have to restart the matchup? And then, thankfully, somehow it gets unstuck. Sometimes the graphics, I think, mess up, like, other spells. It's a bit weird. Also, I think, not that it's a huge deal, but I think if you're going to draw cards in your turn, do it as the first thing you're going to do, right? So it's not, this is more nitpicking than anything, but, it's not really worth it to, like, play a spell, then use Desperate Prayer. Like, I would Desperate Prayer first, see what you hit, and then kind of figure out your turn from there. Doesn't really make a difference for what Knight's doing, but I would say it's a fundamental that, as a Magic player, you learn to do, because when you don't sequence things properly, it really can make a difference. So you just want to develop good habits when you're playing the game, because it's going to improve your gameplay. So here, Knight does it, which is great, right? So you're like, oh, okay, well, I hit Serra's Judgment. Great. Instead of playing Immolating Glare, I think I'd actually rather do that. And I think you would, because Immolating Glare snagging, potentially something buffed up by Craterhoof later, like you're going to get more value out of Immolating Glare, which is crazy to say that you're going to get more than a 7/7 Primeval Titan. But I think there you're just pretty happy to use the Serra's Judgment, which just makes the Titan useless. You're not attacking on the ground, not at least for a while. You've got Power Word Stun. I mean, I would be very, very happy as Knight playing this matchup for how this game is going. Obviously, there's a lot of game to play, but I'd be saying, you know what? I'm sitting at 31 life. I'm not really getting pressured on the ground. I've dealt with one of their threats pretty efficiently. I've got Icing Death coming down in a couple turns. So, really I'm basically just saying to myself, just play it low and slow, and just play tight. Make sure I'm using all my mana each turn. And from there, we should prevail. It hurts not hitting your 6th land here. I feel like Knight did get some pretty not so great land procs, because you could have fired off the Second Sun here pretty easily. You still could, but I think Tristani for the extra mana, totally reasonable. Power Word Stun, totally reasonable. Lane and Healer plus Immolating Glare, totally reasonable. I think in terms of efficiency, I'd probably just go for Healer and Immolating Glare. But I was just going to go with the Power Word Stun and leave a mana on the table. I'd be curious exactly what his thought process was there. My guess is saying, okay, well, I need to save probably my Immolating Glare for the 1-turn kill, which you have to watch out for on turn when Tino has 11 mana. The thing is, it's pretty apparent when you have Immolating Glare up when you're playing Serra, which is also the reason you might not want to play it on that turn. So it's really about, like, okay, how much can I get away with out of this Immolating Glare, where Tino will actually attack into it and it'll soak up something. Probably holding it is wiser, because you can mask it a little bit better as you get more and more mana. So drawing the Thalia here, very interesting, right? Because Thalia does prevent the primal summoning from going off in the way that you would need it to, or the hasten. So it does break up the combo quite a bit. Here I think it's reasonable to go for the Second Sun. Just say, well, I don't think I'm going to die here. But it is possible that he can, right? Because you can just go Primal Summoning into Strahd into Hasten. There you could have gone Immolating Glare to be safe. Could have gone Thalia to, Thalia, use your mana gem and use the sweeper, buy yourself a turn for setup. And very unfortunately, Tino doesn't have the Hasten, but he's got very, very close to lethal. So Knight's going to go to 2 here, or go to 1. But Knight's not dead. Knight's going to go up to 2. He's got the Day of Judgment. So it's really about, does Tino have the Crater Hoofs or not? Goes up to 4. Half the Day of Judgment. There's basically no question here. So it's just, does Tino have the Crater Hoof or not? And there's nothing else that Knight can do. You could Immolate and Glare, play a healer, but you're probably still just dead. And Tino has it. Yep. Oh, so it was honestly, I remember kind of sitting there and saying, wow, it went from Knight super in the driver's seat to Strahd completely changing the rest of the matchup. And, obviously Knight, that first game, not being able to cast the Second Sun, pretty unlucky. Even here, I think getting the land proc at turn 6 or 7 also really messed up the curve. There was never really a great opportunity for Knight to set up Icing Death or even maybe get ahead, or not ahead, but like sort of catch up on mana with Tristani. And I think just Tino also really knows this matchup pretty well and just knows how to kind of have this consistent pressure so that you're just not overextending, and Nissa already has so much card advantage that, although Serra also has quite a bit of card advantage, a lot of debut triggers, a lot of, 2-for-1s, it can be quite tough. And just because I am technically recording this since Mythic League 3 has happened, what I will say is that when these other videos come out, we're definitely going to see, I think, even more depth to some of these matchups and some of the card choices. So that's my PSA for, we're going to be coming out with multiple Mythic League matches. This was the Mythic League Finals, and congrats to Tino for being a 2-time, as of this video, Mythic League champion. We'll see for Mythic League number 3. Of course, I'm not going to spoil it, who gets there and who it is. And Knight, second time runner-up. It's always tough. I mean, I lost in the first round of both the Mythic League tournaments. So, it's definitely tough, but I think Knight played these matches pretty well. I think there were like 1 or 2 decisions where I'm like, it was a little bit more efficient to do something else. But overall, I think that the matchup is just, it's hard because it's not that Nissa is inherently a good matchup into Serra. I do think that Nissa has a lot of ways to pressure Serra, but it's that Nissa gets to set the pace of the game and will have a huge mana advantage in the game. So, even if you don't read a sweeper properly, or maybe don't set up certain pressure properly, you've got a ton of card advantage. You're not going to get pressured by Serra in the way that Nissa is pressuring Serra. And Serra kind of has to wait and react to what's happening on the board. So, Tino gets to really engineer these turns where it's like, all right, I'm going to set up my board. I'm going to apply pressure with some of my dorky, Crows and Tuskers and my 5/1s and stuff like that. And then I'm going to have a turn where I get my Primeval Titan going. I'm going to get some mana. And then I'm going to go Crater Hoof one turn, Crater Hoof the next turn, Strahd the final turn, right? It's just, it's really hard unless you're making a misplay into Immolating Glare. Maybe you get a shot as Serra, or maybe, they just kind of don't do the math right where they're not pressuring your life total enough. But I think that Nissa generally just has a bit of a leg up and a bit more ways to pressure Serra than Serra can actually deal with. So that's kind of my take up on the matchup. And, I love going over these videos. We're doing some live casting in the future, just doing kind of a play-by-play. And really just trying to bring the community into the tournament. And like I said, I would love to see a bunch of people sign up for June. In our first Mythic League tournament, we had like 30 entrants, and it's kind of ebbed and flowed from here and there. But if that's your only motivation to play the game, just hit Mythic, sign up for the tournament, and have fun. The sideboards are really sick, as you'll see in some of these other videos. I don't know. It's a whole other level of skill expression, to say the least. So that's all I got for you today, folks. I'm going to post this as soon as possible so we can get these other Mythic League videos in chronological order, heading out to our channel and to your doorstep. So until then, I will see you next time.